My brothers and sisters, people of the covenant, children of the Most High, there is a mystery that surrounds the throne of God, a mystery that transcends the wisdom of the wise, that confounds the pride of kings, that silences the intellect of man. It is this: God's decisions are always the best. Always. We serve a God who does not see as man sees. We are bound by time, but he dwells outside of it. We are confined to the present moment, limited by emotion, experience, and incomplete understanding. But he sees from everlasting to everlasting to everlasting. His vision pierces through the veil of centuries, through the tangle of human decisions, through the depths of every heart. He does not guess. He does not hope. He does not wonder. He knows. He sees the end from the beginning. Before there was a let there be, he had already authored the conclusion. Before the stars were hung, the Lamb was slain. Before the foundations of the earth were laid, your name was written in his book. And before your crisis appeared on the horizon, he had already made a way through it. We make decisions in reaction to what we see, what we feel, what we fear. But God's decisions are made from a throne that stands unmoved, untouched by time, unshaken by chaos. We are navigators in a fog, but he is the lighthouse that sees the entire sea. He alone knows what lies ahead. And so when he acts, when he says yes, when he says no, when he says wait, it is not arbitrary. It is perfect. Consider this. If you knew every danger that lurked on the road ahead, every pitfall hidden behind the corner, every snare laid in the shadows, wouldn't your decisions look very different? Wouldn't your timing shift? Wouldn't your perspective change? That is how God sees. Not just what is in front, but what lies 5 steps ahead, 10 years down the line, and beyond this life into eternity. It is easy to trust God when his answer matches our desire. But real trust is forged in the fire of delay. Real faith is tested when heaven is silent, and you are left with only a promise. And this is where many stumble, not because God failed, but because his decision didn't fit our understanding. But his ways were never meant to fit inside our logic. His purposes are deeper than our preferences. His delays are not denials. They are alignments. They are divine pauses designed to bring about something greater than we ever imagined. Look at Abraham. The Lord told him he would be the father of nations. But years passed, and the womb remained empty. The promise seemed distant. The decision of God, to delay, to wait, made no sense. But had Isaac come earlier, it would not have been a miracle. Had the child arrived in Abraham's timing, the glory might have gone to human strength. But the decision of God waited until Sarah's womb was dead, until hope was gone, until no one could boast. Then, and only then, did the promise manifest. Because his decisions are not just about fulfilling your hope, they're about displaying his glory. Consider Joseph. Favored by his father, clothed in a coat of many colors, given dreams from heaven. But what followed? Betrayal, a pit, slavery, prison, years of injustice. And yet, not a single step was wasted. Not one moment of pain was out of place. God's decision to allow Joseph's path to go downward was not cruelty. It was orchestration, to bring him not just to Egypt, but to Pharaoh's court, to position him not just for influence, but for salvation. For through Joseph's suffering, an entire people were preserved. We see the immediate. God sees the eternal. We see the battlefield. He sees the victory already won. His decisions are not made in reaction. They are made from sovereignty. He does not consult the opinions of men or the trends of the moment. He is not swayed by public approval or driven by urgency. He acts when it is time. His timing is perfect because his sight is complete. We must understand this. If he says no, it is because what we wanted would have hindered what he destined. If he closes a door, it is because that door led somewhere far from his purpose. If he takes something away, it is not loss, it is refinement, it is pruning for greater fruit. And if he delays, it is not because he forgot. It is because he is preparing something that must be born at the right moment. Just like a seed cannot bloom before its season, neither can the promises of God be rushed. The problem is not with his decisions. The problem is with our limited view. Twin. Like a child who cries when a parent pulls them away from danger, we resist what we do not understand. But in that divine restraint, there is love. In that delay, there is purpose. In that a no, there is protection. His decisions are not disconnected from his heart. They flow from it. Flow from it. They are shaped by a love that cannot fail, a wisdom that cannot be wrong, a vision that misses nothing. There is a tension in the soul of man, a wrestling between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen. We are taught to walk by faith, yet our flesh craves sight. Sight. We want clarity, control, predictability. But the ways of God are not built on human logic. They do not move along the tracks of reason, nor bow to the patterns of our expectations. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than ours. We live in a world of clocks and calendars, but he operates in eternity. We mark time by seconds, but he moves according to purpose. To us, a delay feels like abandonment. To him, it's preparation. To us, a detour looks like being lost. To him, it's the path to destiny. What we perceive as confusion is often the choreography of the divine. And so the child of God must learn to trust not in the plan, but in the planner, not in the road, but in the one who walks with us through it. We look at life through a narrow lens. We judge the present by what we feel and what we see. If there's pain, we assume something has gone wrong. If there's silence, we assume he's not listening. If the answer is different from our prayer, we think he's distant. But God doesn't promise explanations. He promises his presence. He doesn't promise ease. He promises purpose. He doesn't always deliver what we want, but always delivers what is best, because his ways are higher. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army pressing behind and the waters blocking their way, it seemed like a mistake. Hadn't God led them there? Didn't he promise to deliver them? Yet there they stood, trapped, afraid, doubting. But what looked like poor planning was the stage for a miracle. The sea wasn't an obstacle. It was an opportunity. God's decision to bring them to that place was not the absence of direction. It was the fullness of it. His way led them to the impossible, so that they would know he is the God who makes all things possible. It is in the wilderness that his ways are revealed. When you don't understand why it hurts, why it's taking so long, why the door closed, this is where trust is born. This is where faith is purified. If his ways were always clear, we would have no need to trust. If his plan always made sense, we would never learn surrender. It is in the mystery that we discover who he truly is, not just the God who blesses, but the God who leads. Not just the God of the mountaintop, but the God of the valley. The God whose ways stretch beyond human reach, but whose heart is always close. There is a reason God did not reveal the whole journey to Abraham. He told him to leave his country, his kindred, his father's house, and go to a land he would show him. No map, no timeline, just a promise. Why? Because God was not just taking Abraham to a place, he was forming him into a people. The journey wasn't about geography. It was about transformation. If Abraham had known every trial, every famine, every test, he might have never taken the first step. But God's way was to lead him one step at a time, shaping his faith as he walked. And so it is with us. We ask for the full picture, but he gives us a lamp for our feet. We ask for the destination, but he says, follow me. Because his ways are not just about the outcome. They are about the becoming. We are being conformed to the image of his son, and that requires fire. It requires pruning. It requires trust. If we always understood his decisions, we would worship the understanding. But when we trust what we cannot explain, we worship the one who is higher than explanation. When Mary received the word that she would carry the Messiah, her world was turned upside down. The timing seemed wrong. The consequences were dangerous. Her reputation would be shattered. But she said, "Be it unto me according to your word." She did not understand all of God's ways, but she trusted the one who spoke. And through her surrender, the divine entered the human, and the eternal broke into time. God's ways often begin in hidden places. In caves, in deserts, in silence. His answers are often wrapped in mystery. But that is where glory is born. That is where purposes unfold that are too vast for our comprehension. We are not called to chart his ways. We are called to follow them. Not to explain his path, but to walk in it. The one who leads us does not walk in confusion. He walks in truth. His path may wind, it may rise and fall, it may pass through fire and water, but it is always the right path, because his ways are higher than ours, and he makes no mistakes. There is something divine about brokenness when it is surrendered into the hands of God. What the world sees as ruin, he sees as raw material. What others call failure, he calls foundation. What we call shattered beyond repair, he calls the beginning of something new. Nothing is wasted in the economy of God. He gathers every piece, every scar, every tear, and he weaves it into a story that glorifies his name. He does not discard the broken. He redeems it. He does not overlook the wounded. He heals them with purpose. Because in his hands, all things work together for good. To the natural eye, pain seems pointless. Trials appear as interruptions. Loss feels like abandonment. But in the spiritual realm, these are the very ingredients of divine transformation. God does not simply allow suffering. He uses it. He molds it. He speaks through it. The crushing of the olive is what brings the oil. The pressing of the grapes is what releases the wine. The breaking of the bread is what feeds the multitude. And the breaking of your heart may be the very soil where resurrection begins. Joseph did not see the good while sitting in a pit, betrayed by his own brothers. He did not feel purpose when falsely accused and thrown into prison. From the natural perspective, his life was a pattern of pain. But behind every moment of suffering was the sovereign hand of God, orchestrating a masterpiece. When famine struck the land, and the same brothers who had sold him stood before him pleading for mercy, the puzzle was complete. What they meant for evil, God meant for good. Not only for Joseph, but for the salvation of many. God is the only one who can take the enemy's weapons and turn them into tools of glory. He takes what was meant to destroy you and uses it to build you. He takes the arrow shot against you and turns them into testimonies. He does not erase the story. He redeems it. He doesn't rewind time. He resurrects the ruins. There is no wasted sorrow in his plan, no empty pain. Everything has purpose, even the parts we never would have chosen. Sometimes we pray for God to remove the thorn, but instead he gives us grace to endure it. Sometimes we ask for him to change the situation, but instead he uses the situation to change us. His highest priority is not our comfort, but our calling, not our pleasure, but our purpose. And often that purpose is refined in the fire. The gold is purified not by protection, but by heat. The clay is shaped not by stillness, but by pressure. The seed bears fruit not by staying whole, but by dying in the ground. The cross itself is the ultimate revelation that God uses all things for good. What appeared to be the darkest moment in history, the betrayal, the crucifixion, the silence of heaven, was actually the doorway to salvation for all mankind. The blood spilled on that hill was not the end, but the beginning. God took the most brutal injustice and turned it into the greatest. So if he can bring resurrection from crucifixion, what can he do with your broken season? What can he make of the ashes you carry? Paul writes that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Not some things, not just the good things, all things. All things. That includes the disappointments, the unanswered prayers, the betrayals, the closed doors, the delays. Every thread in the tapestry matters. Every scene in the story has meaning. But faith says that behind the scenes, God is at work, taking the fragments and forming a future. It is in this assurance that the child of God finds strength. Not because every circumstance is pleasant, but because every circumstance is in the hands of a perfect God. Not because life always makes sense, but because he always has a plan. And that plan includes even the things that broke us. There is glory in the groaning. There is power in the pain. When offered to him, even your wounds become weapons. Even your past becomes prophecy. What was once your prison can become your platform. The very thing that tried to silence you can become the sound of your testimony. God is not just the creator. He is the restorer. He doesn't only build from the beginning, he rebuilds what has fallen. He doesn't only bless the whole, he blesses what's been surrendered. In his divine artistry, he paints with the colors of redemption. He is not intimidated by your mess. He is not overwhelmed by your past. He welcomes it, sanctifies it, and transforms it. Because nothing in your life has the final word except his word. And his word says that all things, yes, all, work together for good. There is a stillness that only comes when you stop fighting for control and start trusting in the one who holds all things together. It is not passivity, but surrender. It is not weakness, but wisdom. The world tells us to strive, to plan every outcome, to secure every detail, to press forward by our own strength. But the kingdom of God calls us into a different posture, into trust, into yielding, into peace that surpasses understanding. It is in that surrender that fear loses its grip. It is in that place of trust that anxiety has no soil to grow. Because when you truly believe that God's decisions are always the best, You stop needing to manage everything. You stop needing to know everything. You let go of the illusion that your life depends on your grip, and instead you fall into the hands of the one who cannot fail. We try so hard to write the story. We rehearse outcomes. We imagine worst-case scenarios. We demand answers and ask for signs. But God is not obligated to explain his ways. He is not required to give us the details before we obey. He is not moved by our panic. He is moved by faith. And faith is not just believing that God exists. It is believing that his character is trustworthy even when his path is hidden. True peace does not come from knowing the plan. It comes from knowing the planner. And when you surrender to him, you begin to see that his decisions, even the ones that confuse you, are rooted in a love deeper than words, a wisdom higher than comprehension, a goodness that never wavers. Jesus slept through the storm, not because the storm wasn't real, but because he knew who held authority over it. The disciples panicked, thinking they were perishing, but they didn't yet understand that peace is not the absence of waves. It is the presence of the one who commands them. And that is what trust looks like. Not that the winds stop, but that your heart is anchored in the one who walks on the waters. When you surrender, you stop being tossed by every wave of circumstance. You start standing on a foundation that cannot be moved. Peace is not found in getting what you want. It is found in wanting what God chooses. And that desire can only come from surrender. When you let go of your own will, when you release your version of how things were supposed to go, when you open your hands and say, "We, me," something shifts in your spirit. It doesn't always change the outside, but it transforms the inside. The same battle may still rage around you, but you are no longer its victim. You become a vessel of peace in the middle of the war. There is a story unfolding that is bigger than you. Your life is a thread in the tapestry of eternity. And sometimes God's decisions in your life are not just for your sake. They're for someone else's salvation. Sometimes the closed door you grieve is the very thing that protects someone you'll never meet. Sometimes the delay that frustrates you is the divine timing that aligns 10 other lives. You do not see the whole picture. You are not meant to. That is why surrender is necessary, not because you are weak, but because you are finite. And he is infinite. You cannot have peace and control at the same time. You cannot walk in faith and insist on understanding everything. You cannot experience rest if your trust is only partial. Surrender is not giving up. It is giving over. It is placing the weight of your life into the arms of the one who shaped you in the womb and wrote your days before one of them came to be. It is ceasing to strive and beginning to abide. It is choosing to believe that even in the silence, he is speaking. Even in the delay, he is moving. Even in the confusion, he is sovereign. There is a freedom that only comes when you say, "I don't need to understand. I only need to obey." Amvirum. There is a quiet confidence that only blooms when your roots go deep into trust. When Abraham placed Isaac on the altar, he did not know what God would do. When Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours be done," he was not just resigning himself to the cross. He was releasing himself into the Father's plan. And in that surrender, salvation came to the world. When you stop trying to control every outcome, you begin to live in peace that cannot be stolen by circumstance. The burden of proving yourself, of defending your path, of achieving your own destiny falls away, because your confidence is not in what you do, but in what he decides. And his decisions are not based on panic or pressure. They are birthed in eternal love, shaped by perfect knowledge, and delivered with flawless timing. There is a mystery in how God writes his story, a divine paradox that often conceals glory in the garments of suffering. What we count as loss, heaven may count as gain. What we see as delay, he calls development. What we think is the end, he has marked as the beginning. The human soul cries out for clarity, for immediate answers, for visible results. But God is not in a rush. He is not driven by our schedules or limited by our impatience. He moves in perfect rhythm with eternity, and every one of his decisions is woven with purpose, even when wrapped in silence. Sometimes the silence of God is louder than words. It speaks of trust, of testing, of timing. In those moments when prayers seem unanswered, when the heavens feel like brass, when nothing moves and everything stands still, those are the places where faith is refined. We want the fire to end quickly, but he uses it to burn away what does not belong. We want the road to be straight and smooth, but he takes us through the wilderness so that we learn how to follow and not just walk. The delay is not punishment. It is preparation. It is preparation. The silence is not distance. It is invitation, an invitation to draw near, not because of answers, but because of who he is. We forget that the God who split the sea is the same God who allowed his people to stand before it with no visible way forward. The God who raised Lazarus from the dead is the same God who waited 4 days before showing up. The God who gave Joseph dreams is the same God who allowed him to be thrown into a pit and forgotten in a prison. These were not oversights. These were not mistakes. These were divine decisions, crafted in wisdom, sealed in sovereignty, and unveiled only in their appointed time. To walk with God is to walk in seasons of contradiction, to hold promises that seem impossible, to carry visions that don't match your current reality. To believe in provision when all you see is lack. That is where the beauty of faith shines brightest. Not in the fulfillment, but in the waiting. Not in the breakthrough, but in the obedience that continues without reward. The decisions of God are not reactionary. They are prophetic. They come from a place that sees the whole journey, not just the next step. And so what feels like a closed door today may be the very thing that opens your future tomorrow. Sometimes the answer is not found in what God gives, but in what he withholds. Sometimes the very thing we are pleading for would actually derail the assignment on our life. And because he loves us too much to give us what we're not ready to carry, he says no. Redirection, not as absence, but as protection. We must learn to see his hand even in the things he does not allow. We must learn to bless him, not only for the gifts, but for the gates he closes. Because every no from God is connected to a greater yes we have yet to see. When Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, the people shouted, "Hosanna!" expecting a political savior. They wanted a warrior king who would overthrow Rome, establish power, and meet their expectations. But God's decision was not to send a sword, but a sacrifice. Not to overthrow Caesar, but to overthrow sin. Not to raise up an earthly kingdom, but an eternal one. The people's expectations were not wrong in desire. They were wrong in dimension. They were thinking small. God was thinking eternal. They wanted deliverance from circumstance. God was offering deliverance from death. We do not always recognize the goodness of God's decisions in real time. Often it is only in hindsight that the pieces begin to fit. The door that closed leads to the calling that opens. The pain we endured becomes the very place where compassion is birthed. The season we resented becomes the soil where destiny grew roots. And so we are called to trust before we understand, to obey before we see, to worship before we receive. Because our lives are not held together by chance, but by divine intention. Nothing escapes his notice. Nothing bypasses his wisdom. Nothing can separate us from his love. There is a process to every promise. There is a journey to every calling. And there are decisions along the way that won't make sense until the end. But the one who leads us does not guess. He guides. He is not experimenting. He is executing a perfect plan. When we say yes to him, we are not just saying yes to blessings. We are saying yes to mystery, to waiting, to stretching, to refining. And in all of it, his hand never lets go. His word never fails. His timing is never late. His purpose never returns void. Because every decision he makes is not only wise, it is best. There is a depth to God's workings that cannot be grasped by intellect alone. He moves beneath the surface, behind the curtain, beyond the reach of logic. The human mind longs to reduce his actions to cause and effect, to trace his movements with predictable lines, to box his will within our comprehension. But God is not a formula. He is not a system. He is not a machine that responds to input with output. He is a father, a shepherd, a king, a potter. And when he moves with purpose far greater than what the eye can see or the mind can measure. There are moments in life when his decisions seem to contradict his love, when the pain is sharp and the silence is long, when the door is shut and no explanation is given. When the path leads through valleys instead of mountaintops. These are the moments when the soul wrestles with what it believes. These are the places where faith is forged. Because if your trust in God depends on favorable circumstances, it is not trust. It is convenience. True faith holds fast not because it understands, but because it has seen enough of God's character to know that he cannot fail. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows what is waiting around the next corner. What needs to be broken before it can be built? What must die before new life can come? And so in his mercy, he will sometimes remove what we're clinging to, not to hurt us, but to heal us. He will allow doors to close, not because he has forgotten us, but because he is leading us somewhere better. His decisions are not made to fit our comfort. They are made to fulfill our calling. And sometimes that calling requires pruning. Sometimes it requires pain. Fled to the throne. So we can become the person we were always meant to be. When God chose David, he did not take him straight to the throne. He took him to the wilderness. He took him to caves and battles and betrayals. Because the crown was not the goal, character was. God was not just preparing a king, he was forming a heart that would seek after him. And every step of that journey, though filled with trial, was ordered by the Lord. His decisions were not errors to be corrected, but ingredients to be embraced. Because destiny is not just about where you're going, it's about what God is doing in you along the way. It is a dangerous thing to judge God's love by your current season. Seasons change, but his love does not. The storm may rage, the night may be long, but his hand is still steady. His heart is still for you, and every decision he makes, no matter how hard, is filtered through his unfailing love. You may not see the reason now, but faith clings to the truth that there is a reason. Because he does not waste time. He does not make mistakes. He does not play games with our lives. Every delay has meaning. Every disappointment has purpose. Every detour is by design. Job sat in ashes, covered in grief, stripped of all that once made his life feel full. And yet in the middle of that agony, he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." That is the posture of surrender. That is the cry of a heart that knows God is good, even when life is not. And in the end, Job saw what he could not have seen before, the redemption of all things, the restoration of what was lost, the deeper knowledge of who God truly is. But the revelation came after the surrender. The beauty came after the breaking. The wisdom came after the wounds. God's decisions are sometimes hidden in shadows. They do not always come with explanation or clarity. But those who trust him, those who walk even when the path is dim, those who obey when it hurts, they will find that his ways were always leading to life. Because he is not merely concerned with the ease of our journey, he is invested in the eternal fruit of it. The vine must be pruned to bear more fruit. The gold must be refined to shine. The vessel must be shaped, pressed, and fired to carry his glory. We want answers, but he gives us his presence. Oh, this. We want solutions, but he gives us himself. And in the end, that is the greatest gift of all. Not that we understand everything, but that we walk with the one who does. Not that we always see his hand, but that we learn to trust his heart. Because in every decision he makes, seen or unseen, explained or silent, he is moving in love, in wisdom, and in perfect purpose that cannot fail.